Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Matt Culedo from Neoteric, and I want to welcome you to AI Talks, where my guest today is Avi Arnon, a venture investor from City Ventures. Hi, Avi. Um, if I can ask you, just for a starter, to tell us a bit about yourself. What is your role? What is City Ventures? Because everyone probably recognizes City as a brand of one of the biggest financial institutions in the world, but what specifically City Ventures is doing, and what is your role? That's something definitely interesting to understand your perspective better.
Great, and thank you for having me here. So, Avi, I'm a venture investor at City Ventures, been with City for the past 5 years. Been focusing on data and AI specifically when we're still looking at unsupervised machine learning, deep learning, and now with the current wave of generative AI. And maybe just about City Ventures. So, we're a City strategic investment team. We're investing in companies that can help City be a better bank. And we're looking for companies across one areas. We have a team that is focused on fintech and anything that we think a large bank like Citi would be interested in. So these include fintech, wealth, payments, commerce, um, and areas where we can partner with companies. And the other team, which I'm a part of, is the enterprise team. And we're investing in anything that Citi could be a customer of. So cybersecurity, data analytics, marketing, and customer engagement. We're vertically focused. So we have each team members are focused at different areas, and I'm focused on data and AI. Um, and our portfolio includes over 100 companies, which both security and AI are a big part of that. So we're investors in Data Robot, investors in Immuta, um, and a broad range of, I think, market-defining companies as the way that we see that. In the end, we want to invest in the company that Citi should partner with for the next 10 years and then help them engage with Citi.
So, Avi, have you already invested in some generative AI startups?
Not yet. Let's say there are companies who have been building this technology before generative AI was a term. So I can say that there are companies who are using large models with the same approaches. We're invested in quantifying, basically taking immense amounts of data and applying that to KYC and AML. So they're enabling you, if you're looking at a specific person, to aggregate all the information that you have on that person, and are building case management for basically help you understand if you should approve that transaction on that customer. We're investing in a company called Lexion in the contract management, where they're using a large language model in order to understand the contract and help you manage that. So there are a broad range of companies. When I'm thinking about generative AI, I'm differentiating between the application layer, and we have companies that are quickly implementing these large language models as both an add-on to the product, but also a transformation to the product. And the other area which we're currently looking at and thinking about, or at least exploring and looking for companies to invest in, is the emerging LLM infrastructure space. And it evolves quite quickly. So I feel that we're constantly updating the way that we feel about this market.
So, you're more interested in lower level, like technology level of generative AI, rather than the customer facing solutions.
I think it depends on the investor. I know that there are investors that are very close to this market and are very close to the application layer. We've discussed on that earlier. If you're the Andreessen, you're the Sequoia, you have the ability to catch these high flyer um, companies who are both starting very fast but also gaining traction very fast. And I think that they are very well positioned. We're very interested. We're looking at the application layer, looking at a couple of opportunities today. But I think in addition to application layer, we're very much interested in the infrastructure layer, as this is an area which is, when you think about it, and I'm going to touch base about it later, as an enterprise, think about it, we're both going to use external application, but we also want to see how we're implementing that technology internally. And if I want to be helpful to City, I want to both invest in companies that can help us implement generative AI, as well as enables that to do that in a very sustainable way.
I understand. So, when you are looking for investment opportunities for the fund, are you starting from your own needs and scout for specific solutions to specific problems, or are you more opportunity driven and just see what comes in with scouting and then decide, okay, this one's interesting, this one's not interesting?
Yeah. No, so every investor that you will meet will say that we're very thesis driven. We sit in a dark room, we think about how the world is going to look in 10 years, and then we're going to find the company who matches our thesis. And reality is that we're always trying to predict the future, but the best way to understand what is happening is to talk to people who are actually out there and selling this to customers and aggregating all their feedback about where the world is going. And I've spent a lot of time on analyzing markets and understanding what stage is the market at, meaning that what stage of adoption are these early adopters that are using the product? Do we see here more mass adoption? What is the maturity level? What are the use cases? So of course I have an understanding of the space when I'm meeting a company, but in the end you need to find the right company, the right founder that is at the right point for us to invest. It's usually a combination of both. So I'm probably going to meet every company that I can that fits both in our criteria and the area that I'm covering. But I can say that our investment is based on finding the one company. We learn a lot from the companies that we're meeting, and sometimes you're also convinced by what they're selling us, and then we're ready to invest.
My question was because you said that you are looking for investments that CT can be a customer of.
Mhm.
And in that matter, I was asking, do you have like a specific list of challenges
Mhm.
that you want to address? Uh, just to make an example, for instance, uh, maybe you'd like to uh, have a chatbot that answers to the questions related to uh, general terms and conditions of the products that customers is using. The contracts are very hard to comprehend by customers. They don't know where to look for what. A solution to that could be a chatbot that you can ask, hey, if my kid has burned down the apartment because it was using candles, does my insurance cover it?
Mhm.
And you want a clear answer, yes, under this and this statement of the contract. So is it that you would come out on some platform or through your network and say, hey, we have this problem of hardly comprehensible uh, contracts, and we're looking for a Gen AI solution to that problem. And then you scout for startups that can help with it and choose. Or is it rather that you say, we want to look at generative AI startups, and then if you spot the one that does it, then you start to think, hey, should we use it? Can we use it? Does it fit us? So what drives this
Mhm.
change? Is it you, the problem, or is it a push innovation through external partners?
Mhm. I'd say that given Citi's position in the market, both being one of the largest financial companies, but also being financial services and regulated, if I'm waiting for the point where Citi has already acknowledged the problem, looking for the solution, I'm already too late to the market. We usually tend to think, I'll say in longer terms than the technology people internally, because they're looking to solve the current problems that will allow them to meet the current needs. We're trying to look 3 to 5 years ahead, see how the technology landscape is evolving, understand where things are going, and then make an assumptions on what cities should use. And we, of course, use all the help that we can get from our technology team, but usually we think, hey, this makes sense for a city to be a customer of, and then we're going to invest in them, and then we're going to help both sides meet each other at the right point. So we're helping city executive understand what this fits in our technology stack and how they should engage with them. And on the other hand, we'll help companies understand the needs of large enterprises and what type of features, what type of go-to-market approach they need to implement. And I think in over half of our portfolio currently, they're already commercialized. within city, and usually city is also becoming the largest customer. So this is my ideal state, is find a company understanding in the future that city should work with, and work with both parties to make that happen.
So it's like a market-driven decision.
Our investment decision is very much market driven decision. And sometimes, as an very investor, we're either too early to the market, or made the wrong decision. But our goal in the end is to invest in things that city have not, say, a city will need to implement. But if it's a critical problem today, we're probably too late in our investment cycle.
So when you approach the uh, or when you talk to the startup, and what are the criteria for you to consider if it's a good match for the city to adopt the technology? How do you
Mhm.
determine the company's readiness for AI to be an early adopter?
And I think these are two questions, but maybe yourself will answering the first. So the earliest stage that we will invest in a company is we need the company to understand its strategy. So we need to understand their product, where their product meets the market, and then we need to get to understand where the strategy meets city. This can happen in the seed stage, but usually it happens a bit later when they have a few customers, they already have some repeatable use cases, and then they understand where they excel at specifically, and then we can take that part and trying to connect that to city. Um, and I think,
So traction would be uh, like the fast way that you differentiate startups that you are interested in from those that are not yet interesting for you.
I would say that we're seeing companies even to like founders with a presentation, and we can help and advise. But usually we would invest once they have a few customers. Happens post the Series Seed. Once they raised a bit of money, they built the product, they started selling that. So this is I would say, our entry point for companies, where we find the best, both return from a financial point of view, but also the best time to connect with city.
Okay, and when you come across a startup that you think might be interesting, how do you determine the readiness on the city side to actually use the technology to implement certain use case? Because it is not an obvious thing. There are things connected to organizational culture, to the
Mhm.
fear of losing the work. Although the latest report by McKinsey on the future of Americans' workforce indicated that they expect generative AI to generate more jobs in STEM, uh, to transform the jobs that we have to a more interesting ones where you get like easy automation
Mhm.
that you can explain to like a co-pilot and have things done. Like I would totally love to automate some of my LinkedIn activities, right?
Yeah, I'm happy to outsource lean and activity rather than automate. But I think it goes to even a product question, right? A few years ago, all the hype was the RPA, and we've been trying to implement RPA for most years. And even with the limited implementation that most company have, you don't see that great of an impact, both on employees or jobs or the way that we're handling. And I think generative AI is changing that. But the problem is that when you talk with most people today, so they still don't know how to use it. They still don't know the potential impact. Like most use cases, when I'm speaking with people, even with investors, right? We are at the cutting edge of technology. The leading use case was when I'm traveling, and he's doing helping me like do my travel plans. And for most people, they are still trying to both understand what is the right way to interact, what is the right language, what type of questions, and also when should I use that, because it's not currently well incorporated in our work process. Um,
Yeah, and that's really interesting what you're saying because what I see with prompt engineering, uh, it's evaluating in the direction of some kind of coding. Uh, Maybe this is not, coding functions and objects and data structures, but there are repeatable phrases that you use, such as act as an expert
Mhm.
in a field, investor in uh, that vertical, CEO or consultant or someone. And then you say prepare, and then you say what? A list, a table, a paragraph, an article. So, in fact, there are some keywords that you are using to steer the way the generative AI algorithms are working on your prompt and generating the answer.
Mhm. No, I totally agree with you, and I have to say that I was so surprised about that fact. As uh, if you think about investors, their goal in the end is to consume like lots amounts of data, like immense amounts of data, and distill the insights about what is going to happen. And when we're researching a specific topic or a specific company, in the end, we're reading a lot. We're trying to distill it to some conclusion about should I invest in a company or not. And large language models are like classic fit to what we're trying to do. So we're trying, or at least I'm trying to build internally a tool that can help me take all the customer calls or the customer notes from all the companies in that space that I've met, and then I can start engaging with them and get the insights a lot faster. And seeing the difference between someone who understands what's a prompt engineering, what's the right way of both phrasing the question, setting, doing a multi-stage prompt, and the answer that he's getting versus someone that approach it with a Google-like mindset where you're asking question and expects to receive links or things in that nature is just staggering. And I think a lot of people that are both developing and thinking about the internal application need to be really mindful about how you expose these interfaces, because for most people today they don't know yet how to interact. And even doing a crash course in prompt engineering, I don't think you will get all the benefits that you can get from an LLM today. And this is at least my point of view why a lot of people have been trying ChatGPT, say wow this is cool, but they're not coming back from something that you can do on a day-to-day uh, basis.
Okay, if I can try to summarize the answer to the question from Rob. He asked about assessing AI readiness, and then you said that the ability to interact with the models is what you see as the most important thing in assessing their readiness. Is that true, or did I mix up something?
So I think the assessing the readiness is something that you need to be very mindful for when implementing a model. I think the first thing is making sure that you have the data, right? Because if you're planning to do an internal use case, the first problem that you need to have your data in an organized manner that you can actually implement LLM. And this is in a way what I've meant, especially talking with business leaders that generally understand LLM but think that you can implement it on anything anywhere and basically get any result. And the first thing is understanding is that this is a textual model. It works very well on text. It doesn't work very well on structured data yet, and the combination between both is not an easily solved issue today. So the first thing, if you ask me, hey, I want to do a use case, I would say, okay, what is your data, where it is, and can you easily access it? And can you provide me like with significant amount of example that we can do the fine tuning to the model for that use case? If you can have that, then we can start talking. Okay, in that specific area, what are you um, planning to do? And then understand the readiness. But if you don't have the data readily available, and this is an internal use case, then I think you have bigger problems than LLM.
Okay, okay, I understand. And what about other aspects of the readiness? I'm especially interested in your thoughts about compliance, because it's a very broad topic in the context of large language models. Firstly, on the privacy side, like how do we go around algorithm going through personal information? Secondly, how do we cope with biases? Thirdly, how do we make sure that what comes out as a outcome of the generative AI is not abusing some regulations, internal or external policies. Uh, like uh, uh, Midjourney was facing a problem of people generating kids porn with Midjourney
Mhm.
at a very early stage, and there were no kids involved, so it would be hard to determine if it's a crime or not. But at the same time, you don't want to be associated with such actions and such creations. So, how do you make sure that what user expects and gets out of the generative AI solution that you have is not violating?
And this is a great question. I think a question that a lot of enterprise that have chosen, I want to say, the hard path of developing everything, um, are asking themselves, because a lot of the question that you're asking are not have been like fully answered from the market and the components that you have. But if you think about it, I'm starting just from the different components that you mentioned. The first area that you want to solve is basically the security of the model. Because if we're thinking about an internal use case, we've been taking a model, we've been basically either retrained that, but provide him access to all of our organizational information. Even if you're not exposing that internally, you're providing basically any employee with an access to all of your database. Um, and today, these basically modern database are provided with a protection layer that a great example from research recently is that you cannot ask OpenAI, "Oh, how can I make a bomb?" or "How can I don't know, do a terrorist act?" But the fact is that they're emerging basically prompt engineering technique that enables you to bypass that, because LLMs are statistical by nature, and if you can provide the LLM with the beginning of the answer that is statistically correlates to what you want to receive, then you're basically getting access to all your company's data. And there are companies like Lakera who have um, basically building the first and I would say the largest prompt engineering database. So they basically can say, hey, these are all the types of attack that we have been identified, similar to the early days of the web when we were facing SQL injection, where people were attacking any interface that providing over the web. Same thing with these prompt engineering. This is why I think that if you're planning to do that on internal data, this is one of the components that you need to think of. And I know that a lot of the existing DLP, data leakage prevention companies, are incorporating some of these capabilities internally. And I think this is an area that definitely both startups are evolving in, and you need to think of when you think about, I want to implement a model, um, and how I'm governing that. One way to solve that is just not use private sensitive information in these models today. And there's a lot of use cases that are not touching that information, or either um, only on public, providing access only to public information. So yeah, and I touched on one topic. Let me know if you want to to keep discussing other, or you have any other question.
One thing I wanted to get back is the question from Andrew Lockie.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, when you invest in uh, within the space of data and AI, apart from fintech, which is obvious for you, uh, and uh, and the horizontal solution of Gen AI infrastructure, are there any specific sectors or verticals that are more interesting for you as an investor and for the investment market in general?
So I I would separate the answer to two
I
areas.
will I
One,
will I will
yeah.
add just one thing, because what interests me is McKinsey has published a report showing in what industries do we expect the most value generated by generative AI. It was financial services, pharma, and healthcare. The
Mhm.
three that are working on the most private data, most sensitive data. So, how do you come around choosing the sectors and verticals that you want to invest in outside of the fintech?
Yeah. So, and we're investing also outside of fintech, but on the application layer, that we'll say that first of all, we're learning from all the founders that we see, and I think we're in a stage where our mindset is very fixed to the capabilities that these large language models have today, and I think that the innovation is happening on the infrastructure layer is power such like more advanced use case that we're currently thinking of, and if you think about it, what's happening with a basically a large language model is that it's provide the statistical um, representation of a language, and then when you have that converted to a vector of representation, you can match that to other languages. So this is why we can do both English to English translation summarization, but then you can do translation between two different languages, and then you can do translation from um, English language to a picture, or vice versa. Describe me this picture, or please create a picture based on text. And you can do that also to
Yeah,
coding
and I
environment.
just saw a very interesting example of that. So there was this picture of a couple of people and the kid that had a broken scooter with him,
Hmm.
and the kid was crying. And the question was not what's on the picture, but the question was, why is the kid on the picture crying? And the model could actually respond because he has broken his scooter.
And this is a great example. And what I want you to think about is that most of us in our work were translators. If I'm a wealth advisor, I'm basically translating financial language into human language. You ask me, hey, where should I invest? I'm going to all my financial data and I'm providing an advice. If I'm an accountant, I'm translating my English reports into my accounting data, which is a language by itself. And I'm expecting to see domain specific models that take this capability. And then we're going to think about LLMs a whole lot differently than we're thinking today. Right? We're thinking about very language specific, but these are going to be very task specific.
And
So,
that comes really along JC's comment. What I see from JC is a more deep uh, consideration of the sectors and verticals that are appealing to investors, and he brings the thesis that a very important thing is having a unique perspective on certain market or a problem, and then building the AI capabilities around it. And that is the big problem, to be able to really uh, uh, connect the dots between different verticals. That's also something I was learning at the MIT course. That the best innovations comes from colliding minds with unique capabilities and unique experiences and unique knowledge, domain knowledge between different domains.
yeah. And I agree. I would say that when trying to choose the best verticals, of course, we'll lean to a vertical where there's a lot of basically NLP language or textual information. Think about real estate, financial services, and health, because this is fundamentally where LLMs are good. But given the speed that this technology is moving, I don't want to be focused on something else. I'm looking to see people or entrepreneurs that are have a very deep domain expertise, and they can connect the technology to their specific use case and then build a company on that. I want to don't want to tie myself too much, right? Because the innovation is happening in everywhere, and you have these entrepreneurs that are constantly trying and experimenting things. I don't want to say, hey, I'm looking at these areas, I'm not looking at others. But generally, if you want to know if it's there an area that is good for generative AI, I would trying to see how much text is involved in the work process.
I see. I see. So, Avi, if I can get to the latest news of the last week, I believe uh, the study of the efficiency of the model. for OpenAI, seems that it's getting, if I can say that, more stupid. So, like, the answers to the same prompts are less informative, less specific, lesser quality.
Mhm.
Um, do you think? What do you think is the reason of that? Like, is this model learning from our stupid prompts and stupid jokes that we were doing on a huge scale with OpenAI, or why is it getting dumber?
Yeah. So this, first, I think this is something that we need to ask OpenAI. At least what I've heard is that, and it matches some of the things that I'm seeing with people that are experimenting, is that this technology is amazing in taking you to the basically prototype, but then taking that prototype to production is very hard. And I think this is also what happens to us when we're interacting with ChatGPT 4. We had this wow the fact, seeing the first answer, trying the first use cases. Now when we're like a couple of months in and we're going back, we say, hey, this is not like I was expecting the technology to keep improving. And sometimes you're starting to see all the fault. And I don't think that there is a decline. I haven't seen anything that says that they're objectively worse. It's just a feeling of some people that were expecting things to improve. And I think that they are, but we'll need more time both to train. And I don't think there's enough time passed for us with all the synthetic data that's being created in the world for us basically to impact the results that we're getting from
I
OpenAI
don't
and all the rest
remember
of the models.
who did the study, but I am quite sure that there was a reliable study showing that the model is getting dumber, so to say.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'd say there's a lot of parameters here, right? There are concept data to expand the context window. So a context window, so how much information you can put out there, and we know that if you can reaching towards the maximum of that limit, that you have reduction in performance. This might be some of the changes that they are running as all the models are trying to increase that window. So there might be some changes, but I think it's best to talk with OpenAI that know exactly what changes they've run and probably have a good sense of what's happening.
and there's a question from Rob. Uh, are you using or planning to use AI to screen the company before investing? Like, for instance, for validating competencies of employees.
So this is an interesting area, and if you think about the evolution of digitization of VCs, again, we can talk about three distinct stages, and the fourth one is coming in. So the first one was the basically um, the first digitize. We're using Salesforce, Excel, trying to manage our things, and then we moved to the productivity focus when we're starting to use um, basically better advanced SaaS tools that can help us collaborate. And in the last, I would say, 5 years, you have seen VCs setting up data analysis teams that are building ETL pipelines and are collecting all the information in order to do exactly that analysis, trying to understand from the 1,000 companies that we've seen who's the company that we should talk to. For example, a great indicator is to know if I see a founder that worked at the unicorn and now he's moving to a new startup, this is a good company, right? I can sign right off. Uh, and I can basically um, deduct from their experience and the type of people that they are. If they are this concentration of talent in joining this company, I should be focusing. And most of the investors today, especially on the early stage, implementing some tools in order to find and collect data, and collect data on companies and then find the companies. What we're moving to today with these large language models, AI-driven VCs, where the AI now is not going to be focused on collecting the data and trying to understand who should talk to, is looking at the market and the vast amounts of data that we have and understanding what markets you need to invest in. Because if you look back, there were some areas where we all were investing in AR, VR in 2017, and then we all went and we invested in IoT and then the metaverse. And part of the problem in investors is you get like a monocle lens where you're looking only at that area, you're talking only to these customers, and then sometimes you can believe in things that in the end you wake up a year after and say, hey, how could I believe in that area before? And I think the perspective, and especially LLMs that can enable us to collect so much insight about what is happening, what is the actual state and adoption of the market, um, will enable us to basically be more rational when we're thinking about these new emerging areas.
It's interesting that you mentioned the hype investments, the hype for blockchain, and the hype for VR, and the hype for metaverse and for
Whether it's
IoT.
IoT, yeah,
And
with a couple of
like
these hype cycles.
my my perspective on that is that's a desperate move of big tech companies to create yet another market. What I mean is, you have all the apps you want to have. Like if you install a new app, you will stop using another. When I started, with Amazon Prime, I watched less of Netflix.
Mhm.
Uh, so there's always a trade-off, and mm, what I mean by creating a completely new market is before iPhone existed, there was no marketplace for apps. And right now, just the Apple Store is an enormous market by itself. So, what happened is it gave hope that all those crazy valuations that we're seeing with startups on the market, uh, uh, and this crazy easy valuations even after IPO, uh, which basically promises that at some point in the future, this company will start generating so much money that this crazy valuation makes sense. There's no density for that. Just like in Europe, there are no more women, so you will not double the sales of hygienic products for women. Never, because there's no market for it. So, what they want to achieve is create a new space where we spend time and spend money yet again to create a new reality where it happens. That's why the metaverse was so important to Facebook. That's why we were so heavily testing the VR AR, because we need more things to spend money on to sustain the promises we gave on the stock
Ah,
exchange.
so I think, in my perspective, I'm separating the discussion in the stock exchange and the promises that these companies are making to the decision that lots of investors are making, because I think they're in a way disconnected. Um, because only from a certain size you can really rationally think about market education. Like for most companies, at least in the perspective of venture investors, if they say, "Hey, there is no market, but I'm going to explain them how to use it," like you understand that this is a very hard task, and unless you have a major force behind you that is educating the market, that it's not a feat that a single company can do, and it's rare that this is happening. And there's a famous quote, um, I think it was by Henry Ford, that said that if you would ask people during his time what if they wanted a car, what they wanted was say, "We wanted a faster horse." No one say, "Hey, I want a car." And you need to be visionary, and I don't think that we're gonna mess on the visionaries.
Yeah,
Same
and
as Steve Jobs, right, with the iPhone.
I really like this quote, but if I can dig a little deeper to that,
Mm.
because many people use this quote as an excuse not to listen to your customers, and I think it's just the opposite. It's just that Henry Ford dug deeper, so he focused on not a faster horse, but he focused on a faster way of moving. And the other argument was, as funny as it is, uh, with to exchange horse with something that shits less, because at the peak of horse
Yeah,
riding, that was a
the
major
main
problem
concern. Yeah,
all over the world. Like there were discussions about abandoning Paris whatsoever because of all of the dirt that came with
yeah,
horses. So he thought, we need it clean and we need it fast. What can we do about it? But that's listening to the customer very much, but digging through the solution that they have to the problem that they solve.
100% agree with you. And I usually think about it then when Steve Jobs came with the iPhone. It's already been in my time, and I remember the skepticism about using a phone without a physical keyboard, physical interface, and everyone said, "Hey, people are not ready for that." And it took a long time for people to understand that this is actually that people are actually adopting that. And I think that if you had large language models in the past, and you'll be able to collect all the information that you had about customer interaction with other platforms, you will be able to see that. I agree with you 100%. Both Henry Ford and Steve Jobs dug deeper into what people were actually thinking and his own assumption. And I think this is why I'm expecting, and I believe that in a year or two from now, using a large language, or as I call it, like the data lake of an investor, which is my own IP and all the information that I've collected, I will be able to distill these insights a lot faster. And then I could avoid areas that are in the end turn up to be misleading in terms of investment, right? All the things that we have discussed earlier, and I can focus on the areas where we know that there is a growing customer need, and there's a bigger success, bigger potential for success for the startup. And this is like the biggest thing that we can do if we choose the right market. This is most of our work is done at that point. If we choose the wrong market, it really doesn't matter, because even if the founder is amazing, there is no market to sell to.
That's really interesting. So, obviously, so far we covered that sourcing the ideas is within understanding the problems within the company, and being on the connection of different verticals and technology. We have discussed how availability of the data and the compliance is important in the process of choosing the right use case to start with. I want to have a follow-up questions on that. Uh, as an enterprise, do you think that it's better to start with customer-facing solutions or internal-facing solutions?
I love the easy questions, right? Of course, the internal solution. I think both the technology, but also we are not, as most enterprises are not waiting for customer-facing solutions unless you're willing to accept the potential failure. And I think in financial services, this is, of course, not the case, because if you're asking your chatbot, "Hey, what is my cash balance? Can I have a loan? What is the interest rate to my loan?" You don't want anyone statistically guessing how much money do you have. You don't want your card to be declining based on some statistical uh, um, attribution to yourself. You need, in the end, in financial services, we need to do two things. We need to know who you are. We need to know what you have, and this is deterministic. This is not statistical. There are areas in financial service that we can be more flexible around the information, advisory, wealth management. We can enrich the information that we're providing, but core customer facing, I would say we're not ready for that in terms of technology, and I would wait. And maybe on that, Ariel just mentioned that in today's, if you look in an enterprise role in generative AI, you have the most like dangerous person as the basically your head of data science, which sure that if you give him $50 million, he's going to build you our own LLM, and he's going to power all our application. It's going to provide us with 1 billion of revenue. And I had a love
Yeah,
discussion, which if
I totally
uh,
get that. Like every engineer wants to make a framework for something. I remember, when I was coding 20 years ago, I would never use a ready framework to build a website or build a solution. I would always start with creating everything from scratch on my own, the way I want it, the way I think about it. And it's kind of the curse that he comes back with every wave of new technology coming in. But at the same time, um, it's always also the source of the solutions that are then becoming a standard, like Dockers, like microservices before that, like DevOps and automating MLOps. Those things started as internal projects to make things easier and better for someone who experiences it on a daily basis. So, Avi, if we can move to to the third part, which
Yeah.
is
Maybe just before
how,
we're moving,
yeah,
like I want to just comment on what you said because
of course.
like generative AI is a bit of a misleading technology because in a way you look at your friends like outside of the enterprise, you can build application with almost not using code and they will look amazing. And then you think, hey, I can do almost the same thing inside the enterprise. But once you try to implement that, you find that the whole infrastructure that you need to do that in the enterprise is not existing. So it's a bit misleading when you say, hey, I can do that very easily, right? I can connect, you connect to an API, you're providing the framework, I'm putting that towards the information, and that's it. I can start working. But this is not how it works in the enterprise. And the like trying to take approaches that are basically this easy to use are not a good fit. And then you need to really know what you're doing and understand that this is a long project to implement.
That is true. I remember in 2017, we were building a solution for one of the top telecoms in Poland to predict and prevent churn. And
Hmm.
the GDPR part of it, the data security part of it, was so important that as a part of the pilot implementation on a limited number of users, we needed to involve one of the big four consulting companies to give us a stamp of GDPR compliance.
Yeah.
I think this will be a very interesting space that opens up door for new products like insurance from the
Yeah.
results
About the yeah,
of
potential
AI,
results. Yeah.
uh, like maybe an institution that gives you a stamp of compliance with
Yeah.
specific regulations.
Yeah. No, I agree. And this is an area I think we mentioned about the developing infrastructure for LLMs. And one of them that we're seeing is basically the monitor, which is changing its focus. Like when you think about AI or ML monitoring, you want to see the parameters and make sure that it's behaved, that it's not drifting. But now suddenly when you look at LLM, you need to monitor the answer itself. So you need to monitor the content that's aligned to the answer. You need to make sure that it's both protecting the information coming in, protecting the information coming out, and that the responses that you're getting are still helpful. So the level of depth and the monitoring, the need is such deeper. And this is something that I know that there are a couple of companies that are working on, but it's also not a solved technology or solved infrastructure that you need if you want to implement that in the enterprises. And as closer that you get to the customer, the critical that it gets. Because if you have a customer service agent that is getting a response for from his large language model, in the end, he said, hey, this is the response I got. I forward that to the customer. Um, Now you need to validate that what you're providing to your frontline employees is actually accurate. And what happens if there's a mistake? Who's responsible? Who's responsible if I told this customer that he has $1 million in the bank account? Um, so it, definitely in areas that we're seeing a lot of activities, involvement, and I think that there are areas that we'll see a lot more and going to be a lot more important as we see the implementation closer to the customer-facing use cases.
That is very interesting. So, Avi, if I can uh, move to the third part, where I would like to discuss a little how do you execute on a practical side a generative AI project. So let's assume that we've selected a problem. We found a startup with great founders that are solving it. They already have solutions in the market, maybe even in your sector, with a proven way of delivering value to the customer. What are the first steps that you take? Uh, how does the startup become a vendor for City?
So I'm and I don't want to focus here in the city because we're like a unique player with our own limitations. I want to talk generally about enterprise, and I think the case where you're working with an external startups is really depends on how he's providing that information. And I think we've been working with vendors like our whole life. Even banks are not doing everything ourselves, although we really like to build things. So in this case, you basically need to validate, understand, and I think most of the work is going to be done on the regulatory and compliance side. Right? It's always hard to bring in AI into these types of organizations. Especially, it's hard to bring in unsupervised and AI that it's statistically correlated, and I don't have any way to show through our risk management process what is the deterministic like results that I'm getting. So the framework around how you validate the results is really important. And I think the case where it's usually a startup with a product that provides you the output is not that uh, complex. It really depends on the use case and where that's sit in. Example of startups like that is Writer AI, who helps content marketers basically to create content. You can think about Copilot, right? That helps developer write code. These are very standard enterprise implementation, and these companies have already thought about uh, how they're providing both the integration and in a way some of the guardrails. I think the interesting case today, and this is most of I seeing with generative AI, is the first question is not how can I use the tool, it's how can I use these models on my information. All right, and this is I think 90% of the use cases today are happening, because if you're working with a startup, go reach out to the startup. They have um, all the capabilities to integrate. I wonder what you're seeing, right, working with enterprises implementing LLMs.
Well, so like my first thoughts are that enterprises are in one of two situations when it comes to adopting generative AI. So they either know that this is transforming technology, but they don't really know where to use it. So what are the use cases? And the other is that they have hundreds of ideas how to use it, coming from their employees, coming from their customers, but they don't know how to evaluate them and how to execute them. So we've discussed a little about selecting and evaluating, but I really wanted to tap onto the execution part because
Mhm.
if I'm a startup bringing an interesting value proposition to the enterprise, the risk of rolling out the product to their whole customer base is very high. So, what are the steps that you're taking? We are usually working on a three-step process. So, first, we build a proof of concept that creates a laboratory environment with mock-up data without any focus on automating the data transmission or whatever, just the simplest way of setting up the environment that's as close to the real one as possible and showing that in a given assumptions we can deliver value. As the next step, we do the pilot. So the pilot actually works on
Mhm.
the real data. It still can be assisted by humans. It can still be um, a little less of quality at that time because you would select users that are more open to innovation, that are more okay with something not being perfect to get the access earlier, for instance. And then if we meet the criteria of success, which is what we do for every stage, we decide a metric that shows if we succeed, and we have this decision bracket. So above some number, it's a perfect implementation. Let's roll it out. Uh, we have a lower, different number that says anything below us, we just drop it. And there's a place in between where we can reiterate the experiment because we see potential, but we've learned some things that are to be improved. So, how does this translate to the enterprise implementations of those custom solutions?
Mhm. I'll maybe just add, and I agree with the process, and I think this is a process for every company, uh, especially in AI and generative AI. I think it's not different. I think the areas that are a bit different in generative AI is that a couple of months ago, all the executives woke up and understood that this is changing the world, that this is a fundamental shift, and they need to, in their enterprise, see how they're like. basically implementing these capabilities. They've initiated task force. The first job was, as you mentioned, let's identify use cases. Often this started with tens of use cases and exploded to hundreds of use cases, mainly coming from the business, so people are not familiar with this technology. And then you have data teams that need to sit down and say, hey, okay, what can we actually do from this long list? And then you end up with, 10 use cases, or ideas that you can try to implement, and see how many of these small use cases you can power with each one of these projects. What I would say is that there is value in implementing generative AI by itself. And I think the phase of the pilot, when you want to show that you can reach accuracy across X bar, or you want to have, I think that the advantages that you're getting are so big in the implementation and being able to transform, maybe start the process of your workforce, understand how to use with that, are that big that I think that the pilot stage is going to be a bit easier. I think where it's going to be really harder, it's in the actual implementation stage. Where you're going to bring the risk and compliance. And there they're going to start and say, hey, okay, what type of information you're
But
putting
Avi,
into.
that starts with a pilot because if you execute pilot on a real data with real use cases, that's the problem I think with generative AI projects because with predictive AI, it was easier. So I had this
Mhm,
mocked up data, it worked, it was trained well. Then I did the test 80/20. Do I predict well? Uh,
yeah.
I predict well. I don't have to make decisions based on that predictions. I can just test in a pilot that the predictions are right, and then that's what we did with the telecom.
Mhm,
When we had the right predictions, then we started feeding those information to the salespeople during the sales call, so they know,
mhm,
okay, for this person offer 11 spots, for that person offer Spotify or whatever.
mhm. So
But with
this.
generative AI, it's different because the compliance is so much bigger, and you already need to cover it on a pilot. So the
Yeah.
cost of the pilot is substantially higher because of the compliance part.
I agree. And this is part of the reason why you see people internally inclining to, okay, let's build it our own. Let's put the LLMs internally and let's see, just given the advantage that you're getting, let's try to use these use cases by ourselves on-prem on top of our own data instead of bringing an external vendor.
Yeah, and
Uh,
that brings a big opportunity for companies like GraphCore, that
mhm,
the GraphCore has designed AI processing unit, so intelligent processing unit, so kind of like a third type of the processor, CPU, GPU, and now IPU, that is hundreds of times faster than graphic
yeah,
cards on executing computations related to artificial intelligence. So that combined with open source LLMs can create a safe environment for enterprises to close the whole generative AI model within their infrastructure and not actually give anything out. But to do that, uh, you would be most probably starting with facing internal processes and internal needs rather than customer facing applications. So I would expect Citi to be more interested in a generative AI tool that supports all the HR activities like onboarding, offboarding, finding, changing the passwords,
yeah.
support like the first line support for your IT
Mhm.
infrastructure, whatever, rather than actually building a solution that would try to advise customers on investment.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. And I think we mentioned that earlier. The combination between people who really want to build these things, the abundance of open source and the advancement that we're seeing there, in addition to the regulatory um, risk and compliance that you will need to go through if you want to engage with an external vendors, and also the fact that just putting a model or a generative AI use case today, it's an achievement by itself. Because one of the area we're always focusing the technology, but we need to remember the people that are actually out there that need to engage with that. And we're in the early stages of engaging with this technology and being able to do this adaptation with the first use case and then expand into a bigger use case. I think this is there that most enterprise will go with, and it's the most secure one in terms of bringing these projects to production and delivering the value that you were basically promising in the beginning.
Thank you, Avi. My three takeouts from this conversation is first to look through the market perspective at to select ideas for the generative AI implementation, to consider especially internal processes and internal facing
Mhm.
solutions. Secondly, to think about data availability, privacy, and security of the models that are a potential solution in the evaluation phase, and then on the execution, remember to focus on compliance already during the pilot, so that the selection of the ideas that will go through the pilot has to be more picky, so to say, in order uh, to 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 um, to consider the higher costs of running a pilot because of the compliance. Is there something you'd like to add to leave our audience with after this discussion?
This was a great summary. If you're building something in generative AI, especially on the infrastructure layer, I'm really happy to talk to you and see if we can be of any help.
Perfect. So, at the same time, thank you, everyone, for participating. Special thanks to Rob DeHaas for being the most active participant during our webinar. And wrapping it up, I want to share that I would be very happy to discuss any challenges and any ideas that you have for generative AI. Here is the link to set up a free meeting with myself to discuss the opportunities of implementing generative AI in your organization. So feel free to schedule a meeting with me, and I will be happy to have a discussion. Thank you, Avi, for today's discussion, and hopefully see you soon at another event for artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Avi.